We understand that going through this course on your own is very different than it would be if you were with a group of people in a classroom, all learning together and bouncing ideas and stories off one another. The following segment is one that works very well in the group environment, but we thought it's important enough to let you in kind of behind the scenes a bit, to benefit from the material, but also to let you see what happens in the group learning experience.
The way I do this activity is really very simple. I ask them to think about a drug use pattern that goes from responsible use, problem use, to addiction. And that's not, all that different from the continuum that we just talked about, which was non-use, responsible use, problem use, abuse, and then addiction. Think about responsible use, problem use, and addiction. Come up with terms or phrases that describe a responsible pattern of drug or alcohol use. I would ask them to come up with terms or phrases that they think describe problem use of alcohol and drugs. And then I would ask them to come up with terms and phrases that they think describe what addiction is. And frequently the kinds of things that I would hear under this responsible use pattern is that it's legal, the drug and alcohol is used on appropriate occasions, in low amounts, and particularly if it's alcohol, keeping the blood alcohol level below 0.05. And this one, I was always pleased when that came out, because what it indicated was that people in the class were starting to understand that once the BAC starts to get above 0.5, judgment and inhibitions are lowered, and so you increase the likelihood of not using alcohol in an appropriate manner. So here they were tying in actually some understanding about BAC and an understanding of how BAC affects the brain. Set limits, set goals, and stick with them. Here the individual remains in control, and the use does not create any problems in their life, or it does not create the potential for problems in their life. On the problem side, I would hear things frequently like, you experience life problems because of your use pattern. Problems in job, family, friends, and not uncommon that they would indicate that significant others, and those significant others would be coming from work and from family, are trying to offer constructive criticism. The kind of comment is that I care about you, I'm worried about you, and I'm concerned about your drug and alcohol use. So criticism from significant others is a descriptor they would often use in terms of social problem, or in terms of problem drinking pattern. And then addiction, descriptors that would often come out would be can't not use. In other words, the individual can't stop using. They hide a supply of the drugs, or they're always seeking a supply of drugs. Maybe they seek new friends. Maybe because of the things that have been happening in their life and the problems in their life, they have to move and go to a different location, thinking that if they go to a different location, things will be better. They may actually lose their job, and frequently they would talk about this is when poor health starts to occur. So they would discuss responsible, problem, and addiction in their responsible use, problem use, and addiction in their small groups. They would come up with the lists, and then I would ask each of the small groups to share their lists, and I would construct these columns based on what they had put on their list. And then what I would do is ask them to just disregard what we called this pattern of use, responsible, problem to addiction, because sometimes those terms get in the way of understanding how a pattern of drug and alcohol use can affect someone. One of the things that is often referred to as a social drug use pattern is I only use the drugs socially, or I only use the drugs when I'm with my friends. You know, you can be in a social situation and use drugs or alcohol that cause some of these kinds of problems to occur. So these terms and phrases, and addiction is a term that can trigger some pretty strong emotional response. So I would ask them to forget about those terms and then just draw a line across all of these, and then bring a line down through here, and bring a line down through here, and ask them to think first, think about the time you got arrested for driving under the influence. And I want you to put an X on that line where you think getting arrested for driving under the influence should go on this continuum. Forgetting about the terms on the top, but at this end of the continuum, the use is legal, low amounts, we're setting limits. Here there's problems when you get into this section of the continuum, and then here you're starting to see these kinds of characteristics. And I always found it very interesting, and I only had one person in a number of classes who actually took their X and put it here or to the left of this line in relation to their DUI arrest. What I would try to emphasize then is, boy, this is very incongruent with these characteristics. I don't care what you label the pattern. The important thing is the characteristics of the pattern. And obviously, if you drink to a blood alcohol concentration where you get arrested for driving under the influence, I would challenge your thinking and say, can you actually be in control? Were you drinking in a low amount? Was your BAC lower than 0.05? And most of the individuals, when they would put their X's on the line, actually, I had some individuals where they actually were trying to hold their hand back from putting it here, or they put it as close to this line as they possibly could, thinking that then I'm most of the times when I drink I'm really okay, but with this one DUI I slipped up and I went over the line, and that's a possibility. And again, I'll emphasize here with this kind of activity, what I was trying to do was not label anyone as a particular kind of drinker, because then I would ask them to think about the last 10 times that they drank alcohol. Think about the outcomes as a result of using that alcohol, and where would they put X's for those last 10 times. So obviously, if someone's X's start to appear here, what we're seeing is a pattern of use. And it's a pattern of use that looks like these characteristics. If the X's start to accumulate here, what we're seeing is now a pattern of use that reflects these kinds of characteristics. And if the X's would show up down here, again, the same thing. The individual is starting to identify when they use alcohol, these are the typical kinds of outcomes that occur. And so the reason for doing this, I think we can say the time that you got arrested for driving under the influence is somewhere in this pattern of characteristics. Think about this as a way of conceptualizing pattern of drug use, not so much emphasizing the titles that we give, but the outcomes. And if you're clustered down here, then I think one of the assumptions that we can make is really you're not having problems with drug and alcohol. The DUI was something that shouldn't have happened. It did, and I've learned from it, and it's not going to occur again. If you start moving in here, your clustering of drinking experiences start to look like this. This is a time when I think you really should start questioning the role that drugs and alcohol are playing in your life. And the one thing that I'm concerned about is that if the outcome experiences start to cluster down here in this pattern, that we don't want to wait too long. Because now you could potentially have serious health problems as a result of your drug and alcohol use. Unfortunately, most people with serious drug and alcohol problems don't get diagnosed with that problem until they're way over here on this side. And I think it's very prudent and very reasonable, if you're seeing your X's start to cluster here, to start to think about the role that drugs and alcohol are playing in your life.